All right, a little Washington Unplugged Extra. A new book just hitting bookstores this week, Weed Man. It is by John McCaslin, who writes a column for the Washington Times here in Washington. This is a little off your beat, isn't it?
It is, Bob. I stumbled upon this remarkable gentleman whose nickname is Jimmy Devine. That's the subtitle. And he lives in the Bahamas, where I purchased a house about 4 years ago. And being introduced to him, listened to some incredible stories. And finally, after about 2 hours, I said, what did you do for a living to have experienced all these things, such as sitting at Prince Charles and Lady Di's wedding, to the 50-yard line of every Miami football game? And here he's a Bahamian. And he said, should I tell him? He said that to his wife, and this is the resulting book. At one time, he used to be the biggest drug trafficker, marijuana trafficking between Colombia and the United States for about a dozen years before Ronald Reagan put him out of business.
Well, he's the hero of this book.
He is.
A dope dealer.
He's a dope dealer. He's a teetotaler. He's never smoked marijuana. He doesn't even drink a glass of wine. And he's a Robin Hood type character, which makes it fascinating. He gave a lot of the money that he made, and he made millions, and it went to many banks around the world, but he would frequently go back to the tiny little island he grew up on in the Bahamas and give all the poor farmers and fishermen's family envelopes with $10,000 cash, one for the husband, one for the wife, because he knew the husbands always liked to take the money and spend it, and he put a lot of their children through college.
How did you feel about sort of romanticizing, and maybe that's the wrong word to use, a drug dealer? I mean, after all, drugs.
I was able to romanticize it because of what took place afterwards. He never thought he was doing anything wrong. He despised the cocaine traffickers because he saw what cocaine did to people. The Bahamians, and there's the coercion here is tremendous. Bahamian police, everybody seemed to be involved back then. A very poor time, but they felt it was one of God's plants. It's mentioned in the book, if Solomon could smoke it, I sure must be able to traffic it. That was their reasoning. But when he was finally indicted by Uncle Sam, he became a government informant. He was given a code name. He was brought to the United States, and he turned in a lot of the big cocaine traffickers that you and I have heard of. And because of that, instead of getting dozens of years behind bars, he was basically slapped on the wrist. He's now back in the Bahamas. He's kept a lot of his money, but he's not allowed ever to come back to the United States.
Does this book, is it an argument for legalizing marijuana?
You know, I don't go as far as Clarence Page did recently with regard to President Obama when he wrote in April, "Free the weed, dude." And Clarence Page, the columnist we know from the Chicago Tribune, who I've worked closely with, says, like Roosevelt, that Obama should decriminalize marijuana and get rid of the reefer madness. They talk about the $114 billion it could put into the economy every year if it was regulated like alcohol was. Of course, you've got arguments on the other side. As far as Jimmy's concerned in the book, and I don't opine anywhere, I don't give my opinion, but Jimmy says, and I just was down there about 2 weeks ago, he said, it doesn't matter to me because I don't smoke it. I don't care, what they do with it in the United States, but he doesn't feel as if it's a bad drug.
But you feel like there's a difference in marijuana and the other drugs. Is that the thesis you're making here?
Yeah, the Marijuana Policy Project has pointed out in their studies, and as well as the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, that I believe out of 107 people studied, only one had turned to, that used marijuana, had turned to cocaine, and less than one to a harder drug. They point out that if you want to be a stony and smoke it with the bong hits or whatever to great extent, sure, you're going to be a little too mellow to go out and do your job or my job, and that's not what they're proposing. They propose that somebody do it at night like you're having a cocktail with your wife, what have you, and treat it responsibly, and they say with regard to that aspect, it's a very safe drug.
Do you honestly, personally feel that it ought to be decriminalized?
I just can tell you what President Obama said recently. President Obama has admitted to smoking marijuana in his youth. When he was asked during the campaign, as you know, did you inhale? Similar to what President Clinton was asked. Barack Obama laughed and he said, well, that was the point, wasn't it, to inhale? So he admitted that he did what he did. But at the same time, President Obama said, no, I don't think that that's a cure for the economy to legalize marijuana. And with all the hot spots we have around the world today and all the issues from the economy to the Middle East, I don't think you're going to see any action at all with this administration.
Well, I must tell you, this is quite an adventure story here, just from the standpoint of a tale well told. So we'll see what happens.
Thank you very much, Bob. Thanks for
Okay,
having me.
Great to have you, John. This is Washington Unplugged. This is the Washington Unplugged Extra.